Another episode of The Breakdown. I'm James Sayer, your host, and we have special guest Jordan Pearce back tonight to talk with us about a rather arcane topic called the State of Jefferson. Say hi to the world, Jordan.
Hi, the world. I'm Jordan. Thanks for having me on, James, by the way. I forgot to say that last time and felt foolish when I re-listened to it and realized I didn't offer the host my gratitude, so there it is.
You're very welcome. Thank you. Now, the state of Jefferson is a fairly large, remote, rural, densely wooded, mountainous section of southern Oregon and northern California, where there has been a movement to secede not from the Union, but from the states of Oregon and California to form the 51st state of the U.S., the state of Jefferson. So, Jordan, you're from Oregon, and you've spent a good deal of time in this area, is correct?
I've spent a decent amount of time there. I never lived there, but I've got family and friends all up and down the West Coast, and I have definitely spent a good amount of time in the area encompassed in what would be the state of Jefferson. Yes,
which is a huge piece of land. I mean, it's a massive territory. Looking at it, the different versions, different maps of it online, it's a huge section of Oregon and an even huger section of Northern California. I mean, it's really if they were somehow to secede, that would be like a massive state.
Especially now, the initial movement, I think, had the four northernmost counties of California and three of the southern counties in Oregon. That was like the original iteration. I think that may have started in about the 1850s, and they wanted to call it the state of Shasta. But yeah, nowadays the Oregon counties are less involved with the modern movement than they were in the 19th century or even like the mid 20th century. But now I believe the last statistic that I read was that if that area were to succeed, it would be just a little smaller than West Virginia, with a population of like 3.1 million people, which is pretty close to which is like, I think Oregon, like the entire state of Oregon as it is now, is like 4.1 million. So yeah. It would be a pretty big state. Yeah.
Yeah. Now this goes back. This has a history, of course. This you mentioned the 1850s, then the state of Shasta, right? That there was a win. I guess what was it? In 1846, what is it? Oregon became a U.S. territory, right? That Oregon did.
Oregon achieved statehood in 1859 on Valentine's Day.
In 59, it achieved statehood. I guess it was a territory in 46, became a territory in 46, but I guess in the early 1850s, yeah, there was a push to create, you mentioned the state of Shasta, but there was also other, I guess, movements to create the state of Siskiyou, the Jackson Territory, and then the state of Jefferson, all sort of dealing with kind of the same area.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I misunderstood when you said territory. I confused that with state. My bad.
Yes.
But yeah. I think California achieved statehood in 1850. So pretty much as soon as that happened, parts of it wanted to already break away. So.
Yeah, and. So, but I guess the biggest historical occurrence was in November of 1941, right? That was when they set up the roadblocks. There was frustration, I guess, in that it's a huge rural area, right? And so there's
right. Yeah. Tell us more about the roadblocks. Actually, I mean, like you're the historian on this one. I've got some of the local, the more current local flavor. But yeah, let's talk about that I think that, because I think that was their the closest that they got, and like their biggest missed opportunity to achieve statehood, but through no fault of their own, other things were prioritized. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, so it was November of 41, I guess, because of frustration. feeling, particularly, I guess, with issues with, I guess, poor roads, a lot of issues with having roads washed out and things like that, and other complaints that the folks in that whole Jefferson area weren't getting the attention from the state governments that they needed, and so yeah, they set up roadblocks, and they even created like the seal, right? The double X, the two black X's.
Mm-hmm.
The
Yeah,
gold
on the gold pan, right?
Right, which is that's the seal of the state of Jefferson that they created, which represents them being double crossed, right? The state of Jefferson being double crossed by both state governments, Oregon and California, correct?
Right. Yeah. They felt that their distance from the state capitals led to them being neglected by the state as a whole, and especially by the state governments as far as funding and what was being done with their tax dollars.
Right, and so they were handing out pamphlets at these roadblocks. They set up these roadblocks throughout the sort of Jefferson area, handing out pamphlets to drivers regarding the state of Jefferson and sort of explaining what they were doing and why. And it said they would secede every Thursday
until further notice. Yes.
But that only lasted for about a month, right? Because then Pearl Harbor happened on December 7th of 1941. Pretty much put the kibosh on that because the folks in Jefferson got behind the war effort. That just overshadowed everything.
Well, and that was really, I mean, like there were some really successive nails in that coffin that kind of ended with Pearl Harbor too. Because in October of 1941 is when Gilbert Gable, who was the mayor of a city in Oregon called Port Orford, said that several Oregon counties were going to, or should join the Californian counties to form that new state called Jefferson. And that gave it a lot of publicity as well, because up until that point, it had kind of been more of a California thing. And now here's Southern Oregon joining in with it too.
Right. And so the original, I guess, back in 41, the capital of the state of Jefferson, they decided would be Yreka, I believe. Is that how you say it?
Yreka. Yeah. Yreka. You say the Y and then it's Rika.
Yreka.
Right.
So I've never been there. What's Yreka like? What is that? It's just a small rural
It is a quiet community in the mountains. I've spent very little time in Yreka actually, other than in passing. I've spent more time in like Weed and Shasta, and then Southern Oregon, like around Grants Pass, Medford, Ashland. But Yreka, which was named as the capital of the state of Jefferson, the presumed capital of the presumed state. It's a nice little place. I mean, it's a town up in the mountains. I mean, people there are pretty friendly, I mean, it's just, I mean, not having spent a ton of time there, there's nothing like off the top of my head I can like use to distinguish it from other, mountain, quiet mountain communities in the Pacific Northwest that people picture when they picture one of those. I mean, people are friendly, there's not a lot of traffic. It's quiet pretty much all the time. And it's nice, not a bad place to, go out and, hang out with some trees and, do some fishing and hunting and, enjoy the outdoors like you should, or like lots of people like to anyway.
Yeah. So that's, how far away is Yreka from like the nearest city?
Well, the nearest like big city would probably be, well, in California, I guess it would probably be like maybe Redding. My geography on the area, I must admit, is not great. But, I mean, Ashland and Medford are both pretty good-sized cities in Oregon that Yreka is very close to. Yreka is pretty close to the Oregon border. And so, Ashland, Medford, Redding, I think a lot of those would be the larger cities around there. And neither, like with the exception of, I want to say, like Ashland, they're not particularly close, but they're not, none of them are more than about 100 miles away. So, but I mean, it's not isolated, but it's definitely rural. I mean, it's a good piece away from the bustling big cities that you think of when you think of
which
California.
they like, right? That's the culture as I understand it for that place is that's why most of the folks are there is to get away from the big cities and the hustle and bustle.
That's the point. It's it moves it moves differently than the cities. I mean, it's not a city. It's people have their space and their privacy and can go about their business as they see fit, and you got to start getting pretty noisy before people start poking their noses into it, because everybody's got their thing they're doing around there, and it's a different way of life. Some people might say it's more of like an Americana sort of feel. It almost feels like just how they make small towns look in the movies is kind of like the feel that you get there, because it's a lot of small towns.
Yeah. So, and I guess in a way that's a bit of that ties in with some of the frustrations that folks feel in this area that have kind of contributed to this sort of State of Jefferson movement. From what I was reading from the different historical accounts regarding the 41, I guess it's more like a protest, really. It seemed was to get attention from the state capitol. Right. Seemed more geared towards that. A lot of in their pamphlets and articles were mentioning poor road conditions. That was a really big issue.
Yeah. Well, and just funding in general. I mean, like, they want to be individualists and they want to be on their own and everything, but they still deserve to have passable roads in the wintertime. I mean, like, you shouldn't have to get out your boat to get to the store every time it rains because the road's washed out,
Right. Yeah. Plus, the rest of the country and, even throughout the world rely on, right. They use and need a lot of the resources that come from that area, like whether it's timber, or different minerals.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of copper, or there was at one time. I don't know if there is a lot of copper mining out there, but at one time, one of their grievances was that there's a lot of copper in this place to be had, but we don't have roads to get to it.
Yeah, that was definitely part of the issue in 41 with that. But then anyway, after 41, it kind of died down, but then there was in 2013. It died down. It never went away. So this is kind of like a cultural thing for folks that live in this area. A lot of these folks do have this sort of, there is kind of a mindset that they are sort of in the state of Jefferson in a sense.
And they absolutely have, like, there is a different vibe there. I mean, you can tell. I mean, like, going back, because I used to bounce back and forth when I was a kid between like Portland and San Francisco, and I mean, like, you can tell when you're around San Francisco just because of like the feeling and like the culture and the way people are, and you can tell when you're around Portland for the same reason. And in between, you have this like sprawling, rugged wilderness that is also populated with people that have their own separate like culture and vibe and feeling, and I don't think it's adequately represented by the cities, like especially the major cities bordering either area. And I know San Francisco is a little far south, but even like Sacramento, I mean, Sacramento is still a big city, urban sprawl and all that. But then once you get 25 miles north of that, you start going up into the hills, and it's, big, evergreen trees and mountains and, all the stuff that you think of when you think of driving through the woods in the Pacific Northwest, and it starts in California.
So tell us a little bit more about the culture, like the feel. You were comparing like the city, being in San Francisco or Portland versus being in somewhere in the state of Jefferson area. What would be the biggest differences you would notice?
I mean, the people tend to be in less of a hurry. more people have time to talk. I mean, if I sit down at a bar in Portland or San Francisco or Sacramento and like sit down and have a beer, chances are I'm going to sit down and drink my beer, and like everybody else is going to sit down and drink their beer and do their thing. You sit down at a bar in a place like Weed, or any of those places like that. Next thing you know, you got 3 different people to talk to because everybody's just kind of sitting around and everybody's friendly. And it's not that they're not minding their business. It's just that the vibe is less. It's less uptight. It's more of a community feeling than it is a metropolitan feeling.
Right, well, it's a slower pace to begin with. So
well, yeah, exactly. But then and that's reflected in the attitudes of the people there too. I mean, nobody's in a big hurry. They got time to sit and talk, and they will. And it's it's very, people there are very hospitable. It's like that Southern hospitality thing that people equate with the Southern United States, but I mean it is alive and well in that area too. And I think it has just more to do with the more rural community feeling of, everybody's, we're all, in it, to be ourselves, but we're also all in this together, and, we're all going to be here. So let's get along and hang out and have a good time.
Yeah. I mean, if you're out, I don't say the wilderness, but kind of, you are. I mean, a lot of that State of Jefferson area, is,
it's mostly
remote.
up. It's up in the mountains. I mean, depending on your carrier, cell phone signal's a little bit spotty. There's a long ways between, different landmarks and whatnot. I mean, like it's the mountains.
Yeah, I mean,
not to say that it's backward, really but it is remote.
It is, you really do have to count on your neighbors or whoever's out there, right? Because there's not much. People in urban areas can count on more services. You can count on.
Yeah, exactly. There's gonna be a cop around the corner if there's an issue, or a fire truck or an ambulance is 5 minutes away. Around there, it's not always necessarily the case. And people they rely on themselves, but they also know that they can rely on their neighbors and the rest of their community.
But all right, so in 2013, all right, jumping ahead from 41 all the way to 2013, on September 3rd of 2013, the Siskiyou County, California Board of Supervisors voted 4-1 in favor of withdrawal from California to form a proposed state named Jefferson. The proposal was joined by the Modoc. Is that how you say it? Modoc?
Yep, you got that one.
Modoc. I can never tell. The Modoc County Board of Supervisors, that was joined September 24th, 2013, and then January 21st, 2014, the Glenn County Board of Supervisors also voted to secede from the state of California as part of the state of Jefferson. So that all happened. I think at this point now there's 12 counties in Northern California, I believe.
I think it's 11.
Is it 11?
Yeah. That was one of the things I was reading. They need 12 counties to actually get it on the state ballot, and they're at 11.
Yeah. So they're close to getting it on the ballot, maybe. But even if they got it on the ballot, what are the chances of that being approved? I would think probably not very high. What do you think?
Honestly, I mean, like, I've never lived in California, so I mean, like, I don't know much about the regional politics of the state as a whole. And so I'm not sure. I mean, like, I doubt it. I mean, like, I also doubt that Oregon would vote to let, the southern counties in Oregon secede, to form a new state as well. I can't tell you how or why, but it just feels unlikely to me.
Yeah, I was reading one article where someone was speculating that, well, I guess there was some poll taken, I don't have it in front of me now, but where supposedly a number of Portland residents were fine with letting the folks from these 7 Oregon counties, get it on the ballot, and vote, they wish to secede, let them create their own state, join the state of Jefferson. Not necessarily that they supported that, but that they could at least get it on the ballot. to be voted on. Just I don't know. I maybe so. I think the person was saying that there were people in Portland who had the sort of, I don't know, kind of a laissez-faire attitude of, well, yeah, if they want to secede, from Oregon, let them vote for it.
Yeah, let them. Yeah, sort of let them try it and find out, sort of a thing, almost, or.
Right. In a way, yeah. And some even perhaps like of the uber progressives in Portland, which there are
plenty of
a couple of those.
Yeah.
That some of them might even be willing to say good riddance, right? Let these 7 counties go, join the state of Jefferson, and then we'll be even a more progressive state, and we won't have these 7 counties sort of holding us back. That Oregon could be even more progressive if these other counties were to leave, and that because those counties contribute, those rural counties, take more resources away from the state government than they give. That one could argue that they're more of a burden. I don't agree with that, but you could make the argument from.
I've heard that argument made on a national level to a certain extent as well, and so I'm familiar with that. And I mean,
I don't think
that's. I mean, I don't know. That sounds to me like, I mean, that sets an interesting precedent where it's like, okay, well, if this area of the state all decides that they want to be their own entity, and these days it's largely drawn along the lines of political ideology. That's when you're going to start getting more and more of these. I mean, because we were talking about the state of Jefferson, but I mean, like there's the state of Lincoln, which is like the panhandle of Idaho and eastern Washington, or like Greater Idaho, which is the southern and eastern counties of Oregon wanting to secede and like join with Idaho instead of being part of Oregon. Yeah.
Right.
And that you start, I mean, like, one little crack in the windshield suddenly becomes a broken windshield, so
I think it's a high bar for them, a super high bar for most of these, for any of these sort of, secessionist, state secession, or,
yeah, well, you'd have to get both, like whichever state was initially like involved in its, their legislative agreement, and then the federal government to agree with it as well. So I mean, yeah, there are hurdles there,
which is even more complicated with like the state of Jefferson, because you got 2 states,
right? And so
two state legislatures have to approve it, then Congress.
Right. Yeah. And yeah, same thing with many of those other ones where, bordering parts of states that are less affiliated. And it seems like it's the less populous places, where it's a lot more land, a lot fewer people. And it's different. I mean, Oregon, has voted for the Democratic candidate, the last several years. I mean, Hillary Clinton soundly beat Donald Trump in 2016. Joe Biden soundly beat Donald Trump in 2020, and the problem that a lot of people see with it is when they look at the map, it's blue in, Washington County, Multnomah County, Clackamas County, and then the rest of it's red, representing the different parties and whatnot. And so they're saying, why is it that so much of the state voted for, this way, but we went that way? This town's controlling all of us. And it's like, well, yeah, but that's where all the people live,
Right. Land doesn't vote. Right.
Yeah, land doesn't vote. And so that's, I mean, sorry, I don't know. I don't think that people that live in less densely populated areas should be given more voting power, though. Nor should people that live in more populous areas be given less. I mean, everybody's vote counts as one, and when you count them at the end of the day, the most votes win. You're the one that chose to live in the middle of nowhere with your next neighbor 10 miles away.
Yeah. That comes with certain trade-offs.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And it works out in some states, especially like, with elections and whatnot, it works out in some states and, not in the others.
So, all right. So moving forward to like 2020 and up through today, the recent sort of resurgence of the state of Jefferson uh, really kind of blew up again in that state of Jefferson area with the COVID uh, sort of regulations, the shutdown, you know,
Mm-hmm.
required masking, things like that. That led to that COVID controversy. I guess stoked the desire again to return to the state of Jefferson movement once more. I guess this time there was more discussion about restrictive federal logging rules, less about the roads this time, and more about they're
Federal
not.
regulation in general, yeah, and yeah, and there was at one point at least one loosely affiliated with the state of Jefferson like group that calls themselves the Jefferson Militia or something began threatening
Yeah,
violence against the governor, um,
yeah,
and 1 in 6 people in the area of California that would be the state of Jefferson voted to recall Governor Newsom over COVID health restrictions in a recall vote sometime during the COVID pandemic. I forget what exact year it was, but yeah, I mean, like, there's definitely a disagreement there between them and the state leadership, and seems like there has been for a long time. And it's just the reason changes over the time, but the sentiment remains fairly consistent.
So, all right, you've been you haven't lived in the state of Jefferson, but you've been through there quite a bit over the years. Have you noticed any changes? Has it changed over the years?
I mean, not since the
Still pretty much
last.
the same?
I mean, the it's been a while since the last time I was through there. 2019 was the last time I passed through. But I mean, no, not a whole lot. I mean, like, businesses come and go. I mean, but I mean, like, the people there. I'm not going to say the people there haven't changed. I mean, of course, people change and everything like that. But I mean, but the attitude and like the vibe of it and everything is very much what I remember it being like when I was a kid. I mean, it's friendliness, it's independent. It's I'll help you if you need it, but you know mind your business. People. It's a very independent area. I don't know
Yeah,
how else to say it. I mean, it's just there's a lot of land and not a lot of people, and there's plenty of room to pretty much get up to whatever you want. And that's what brought a lot of people there too. I mean, there's more people there than there used to be, especially like I think Humboldt County became a part of it, and that was a large agricultural area for growing cannabis, when they legalized medical cannabis. And I mean, Humboldt got on the map because of the famous Humboldt pot and this and that. But I think for the most part, I mean, it's an isolated rural area that has people that are there because they want to be in an isolated rural area, and that's the trade-off is that, yeah, you're probably going to get a little bit less attention from the state government, because there's less people there, and
yeah.
the louder voices are coming from the city. And I think that's where those rebellions came from too, with the secession in the 40s, with wanting the better roads and this and that. The squeaky wheel gets the grease, and so they started making noise.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it totally makes sense too, that these folks, they are, out there removed from the large cities, and this is an issue not just in the state of Jefferson area, but for rural populations in a lot of places, especially in the United States, where they struggle with poverty, unemployment, low wages, much lower compared to urban areas. Not as their social services are fewer, not as good, simply because of funding. There's more funding available to big cities because they need it, because there's just more people there. Right? You got millions versus hundreds, or
Yeah.
thousands. But I mean, it's so yeah, the resources for education, medical, dental, transport, the bulk of that's going to go to urban areas. But yes, people in rural places, they still, like you were saying, they need good roads. They still need to be able to go to the doctor, right? They need
Well,
to be
right,
able to
yeah. I mean,
educate their
they
kids.
still need the support from the state that is, expected of having a state government, and so I understand that argument absolutely.
Yeah. And so, I mean, a lot of it seems like, okay, so in general, so typically, well, okay, we also mentioned the COVID restrictions, mask requirements. That was a big thing for a lot of rural areas as well that, tend to be, more independent spirited, and a very suspicious of government regulations to begin with.
Well, sure.
Uh,
Not to say that they're wrong every time, but they're
but,
they're not right every time.
oh no, no. And I mean, no human organization
Fair.
gets anything right. Uh, Hardly any time. I mean, even if you get something right, you don't get it perfectly, right? Human action, human behavior, especially collective human action, when you're talking in politics and public policy, allocating resources for millions of people, uh, not everybody's going to be entirely happy with how that works out. That's the nature of compromise to begin with. Is nobody quite gets everything they want. Uh, it's like the urban areas generate most of the revenue, most of the income. Now they get a lot of the, say, raw materials like resources, minerals, say lumber, whatever else from rural areas. But
Mm-hmm.
most of the value, most of the money, most of the creation of all the different things that you can do with raw materials, that gets done in the urban areas typically,
Right.
where you have the concentration of more knowledge because you have more people with those the kind of knowledge economy skills to be able to create a lot of whether
Right,
you're
but
talking about San Francisco, like IT or information systems or um, all the different types of industries that simply need to be in an urban area.
well, sure, but they still wouldn't have the raw materials if it wasn't for the people harvesting those from those more rural areas, where they're doing the logging and they're doing the mineral mining and
Right.
the
We're
rest
Yeah.
the rest of the things that come from that. And so I mean, like, they still deserve their piece of the pie, as it were.
Right.
I mean, because I mean, like, neither place would go anywhere without the cooperation of the other. you
Yeah.
know
You do
um
need both. Yeah.
and so I think what they're feeling like is they're not getting the due recognition or due respect from the state governments for the fact that what they are doing. They're doing harder. You don't think of having a backbreaking job when you live downtown. I mean, the loggers and the miners and the people out there doing that work are busting their ass, and then they're feeling like they're not really getting they're just desserts when it comes down to it, when they look at the wealth and the opulence in the cities, and then you can't drive down your road without a lifted 4x4 because the roads won't permit it because they're not really roads.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I mean I mean, of course, there's a lot of people in the cities that are poor too. There's a lot.
Which that I believe is a topic for another time. But I mean, like, yeah, I mean, the people at the bottom are the ones that get all the shit lumped on them. Forgive my language. You know, and these are the people that are, like, for a lot of industry and a lot of things, they're the foundation. They're the ones that are taking that raw material and harvesting it and making it into something that you can, refine, or refining it themselves and giving it to you as a usable product. I mean, there aren't too many lumber mills in the middle of the city. But there are structures made with wood, so, I think that, a lot, that's where a lot of that resentment's coming from, is that they're not working any less hard than anybody else, and they're not any less deserving of it than any place else in the state, but they're not getting what they feel that they need. And if you try to go outside when it's raining hard, you see what they mean.
Yeah. So we're getting into like, we're understanding that, we even though there's like not that many people living in the state of Jefferson compared to the urban areas, these folks still need, the services and the economic, I guess, opportunity to be able to, to live decently.
Well, yeah.
That's a lot of it, is that there's not a lot of economic opportunity when you're out in the wilderness, because you're out in the wilderness.
Well, right, and that's true. And the thing is, and a lot of that, too, could come from logging regulation. As forests dwindle, and they have more rules and regulations about how much you can log and from where, and how much you have to replant, and how long you have to let it regrow, and everything like that, to try and sustain things for as long as possible. Those jobs are going to dry up, unfortunately. I mean, that's. That's the progression of technology. That's the progression. That's progress. But I mean, I don't want to. That seems like such a cop out. To say that's progress. But I mean, as technology advances, some jobs aren't needed anymore as other jobs are. They don't need candle makers now with electric light bulbs like they did in the 19th century.
Right. That's just part of that. There's a natural shift.
Yeah, and and that happens as a result of disruptive technology, or the depletion of resources, or any number of things can change what the demand is. And so you have because of the way I understand economics, without the demand, the supply is useless. So these people that have jobs that aren't in demand are kind of put in a rough position where they got to figure out something else to do. But I mean, I don't think that the right move would be to be like, okay, wait, no, let's just stop moving here so that these people can have their jobs. Because I mean, it's mostly in the name of moving forward as a society, and figuring out better ways to do more for as many people as possible.
Which leads me to my next point. So I read this really interesting article that was from November of 2018 from the Brookings Institution, Why Rural America Needs Cities. And basically what they argued is that what they basically need, what they recommend, a number of recommendations, but the main recommendation was, we don't need a small number of superstar cities, like say, LA, San Francisco, Chicago, New York type of thing. What we need is, better dynamic, economically dynamic, medium, smaller cities that can reach further into the rural areas, right? So that, that for, in this paper, actually, they make certain distinctions between different types of rural areas. So you've got the metropolitan area, right, around the city. But then outside of that is the rural area, or what they, outside the suburbs would be the rural area, what they would refer to as, they call it rural adjacent, because it's adjacent to the metropolitan area. But then there's also the rural area that's not adjacent to a metropolitan area. Also, you refer to that as to isolated. So they're where there's the one that is adjacent is not as isolated. When there's an economic downturn, they suffer from it, but they don't suffer as badly as the more isolated, remote counties would. The remote urban, rural areas would, right? Where typically the cities in the past typically do better during most recessions, but that being in proximity, being close to the city, being close to that served as a buffer to help the rural area, the metro area.
Because I mean, especially, if you're in one of those, rural adjacent areas where you're nearer a city, and, and something happens to where there isn't work for you in what you do here. I mean, you can move to that, you can go to that city, learn a new skill. I mean, there's, with the way transportation is, most people have cars, especially people that are already looking for a job. A lot of people have, the ability to transport themselves, great distances, on a daily basis to go and find work elsewhere. But when you're out in those isolated rural areas, you don't have that kind of opportunity when there is an economic, disaster or downturn or whatever you want to call it,
Right.
which I imagine you would feel that hit a lot harder if there's nothing else around you and now there's nothing here. So what do you do? And
Right.
that could be I can imagine that would be a very, stressful feeling and whatnot. But at the same time, I mean, like, as time progresses and as technology progresses and as things change, I mean, like, it's kind of a lot of it's people's job to move with that. Planting your feet in the ground and saying, nope, I'm right here and I'm not going anywhere is often counterproductive, I feel like. You
Yeah,
don't have
we
to
all have
change, you
to.
don't have to
We all
change
have
what
to
you
adapt.
believe in, but sometimes you got to change your job. And that might mean changing where you live. And, unfortunately, also in those rural areas, a lot of people don't have the financial means to change where they live. They kind of are where they are, and like they can go to someplace else like that where it's likely that the job opportunities aren't much better anyway.
Right. So what this paper is kind of arguing for is that, if particularly that state governments have a big role to play with this, working with, and they really make this clear, they need state governments, which can also, they can also get federal funding as well for this, but they need to really rely on the regional and local leaders' input for how to really restructure economic policy making to empower these smaller communities. So that involves, really listening and consulting with kind of the power brokers of these smaller communities and figuring out a way to, create these smaller cities, or, better, design uh, industries to be able to, I guess, give more economic possibilities, for smaller cities and medium-sized cities that are more accessible to rural areas, um, than like a large metropolitan area. And they also recommend aligning public investments to prioritize homegrown job creation, right? Homegrown job creation, in those State of Jefferson counties, in those rural towns, creating them there, not, like from there, right? Like people that are from that town creating their own industries or their own businesses, not recruiting, individual big companies to come in like an Amazon or something, which they've seen that, there's been a lot of studies of this recently, that often states that do like attract a business, like a large business with like tax incentives, tax giveaways, tax breaks, that ends up often being counterproductive. Like they lose so much revenue
Yeah, it
from
almost
the tax.
always works out in the favor of that whatever business entity that came there, rather than in the favor of the state government and the populace and whatnot. And yeah,
And
and that they prove that
often
over and over again.
the superstar, yeah, the company has too much clout and kind of bully the state around a little bit. But what they're talking about is having, working with people in these areas, right, to, create jobs and create businesses that are from these rural areas, uh, and that the more, but integrating that with smaller towns and medium-sized towns, so that they're not as isolated, right? That they'll still be rural, they'll still be out in the wilderness, but they won't be as isolated as they previously were. They also mentioned what are called uh, uh, micropolitan areas, which I'd never heard of before. But a micropolitan statistical area consists of the county or counties associated with at least one urban cluster of at least 10,000 people, but less than 50,000 people. So that gives you an idea. It's a small, city, very small. But
Right.
creating those, or if they already exist, bulking them up with better opportunities, better businesses that
Well,
don't just rely on resource extraction, right?
and there are many of those in the area, in that Jefferson area. I mean, Wairika's one of them. I'm not sure. I mean, Ashland is a university town, but I mean, like, that's a pretty good sized city for down there. I mean, like, I don't know if it has 50,000 people in it, but I mean, it's definitely more than 10. Same goes for Medford. Same for Roseburg. I mean, Weed is another one, which is right on Mount Shasta. Shasta City itself. I mean, like, there's all sorts of cities that like have populations within that range, but yeah, I mean, like, and there's not a ton of like big box stores down there. You don't have like the great big malls with like J.C. Penney and all that stuff. I mean, most of the businesses are a smaller like I don't know if mom and pop is the right term, but it's not the gigantic franchises that you see in a lot of the major cities. It's a lot of there are a lot more smaller businesses. Which is also part of what makes it cool. And I mean, like, and like most people that frequent stores of both types already know that, I mean, you're going to pay a little more at those places, but the quality of the stuff is generally better. And like, it's a different feeling. You're not walking around in a mall, you're in somebody's shop.
Right. Yeah. And that's the attraction. That's a big part of the attraction is it's a slower pace. It's not this corporate,
Yeah, it doesn't have the high polished shine of the jungle. Yeah.
And well, it's interesting. Years ago, when I was in grad school, in the DC area, and one of my professors was comparing kind of the difference between rural and city, and he was talking about living in the rural areas. He was saying, people are real nice. It's a slower pace of life, but there's no damn jobs, and he says, you come here, there's plenty of jobs, but you got to work like hell. And it's like, look at you, it's like, it's not, it was a night class. It's like, it's 9 o'clock at night, and here you are in class. And it's, it's an interesting comparison. It's like, yeah, there's plenty of work in most of the big cities, lots of work. Comparatively, when you compare it to, like a rural environment. But yeah, it's there's more opportunity.
How many of those jobs don't suck?
What's that?
How many of those jobs don't suck?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I guess it depends on what you're into, right? I mean,
that's fair.
There's country mice, and there's city mice.
That's true.
Right? And so, I mean, I'm not trying to make the point that one's better than the other, because I don't believe that. But
no, I get what you mean. Yeah. You're into what you're into, and some people, some people are built for this, some people are built for that. I definitely understand that.
Well, yeah, and even like the people that do enjoy the city, right? I mean, we live in Portland, more or less, just outside of Portland. So we're pretty close to part of that urban statistical, Portland statistical area. But I love the wilderness. I try and get out in it as much as I can. I hike as much as I can. I mean, that's why most people, I think, I don't know, awful lot of them come here to Oregon to begin with, is because they're in love with the nature and the natural beauty that's here everywhere here.
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, I grew up on a 70-acre horse farm, 20 minutes from downtown Portland, where I could walk out in my backyard with a shotgun and shoot it at whatever, I mean, and it is a short drive away from being in the middle of the largest city in the state, so I mean, I'm no stranger to the urban feel. I grew up in it and I like it. I like being out. I was always close to Portland, but I never actually lived in the city until I was an adult, and I spent, most of my childhood in, rural, not more like rural adjacent areas, not exactly suburbs, it's too far away from the city to necessarily be a suburb, but we were close enough to the city where we weren't that isolated, but it definitely still had, a similar, rural kind of, individualistic, largely conservative kind of feel to it. And, not far at all from, ultra progressive, super, liberal left wing Portland.
Yeah. So that just finishing up here, that article I was talking about, the Brookings Why Rural America Needs Cities, that it also recommended preparing rural workers for the modern economy by strengthening universities, community colleges, and workforce readiness programs in rural areas. Make that more available to them to be able to dial that in with the folks that are in charge of these educational institutions, but also needing to sort of recommending that they sort of work with, again, regional, local leaders, to determine like what the needs are, right, of the people that live there, the needs, abilities, skills, for what type of training, what type of education.
Well,
right? And that's really, some people might want to learn IT. Some people just might want to learn how to be a good plumber, right?
But they've got to have some place where they can go and learn it.
Right. And so make that more available to them, right? And that this is something that really needs to be done nationally. It's not just for
right. And there's a serious financial gate there too, though. I mean, it's like, oh, of course you can go and get a student loan, but there's a lot of people now that are, still paying the interest on their student loans after having been paying their student loans for the last 15 years. And they haven't really even knocked down on the principal because they're still paying the interest from, the last time they told everybody, ooh, the economy is tanking. Everybody better go to college. And there's a lot of people that are up to their ears in debt. And so you hear about that now and it's like, well, I don't want to do that either. So, I mean, it's just, it's the financial stability of people in these rural areas doesn't often give them a good feeling of the kind of upward mobility and the confidence to be able to like go and do this and not still be screwed at the end of the day and just now be screwed and in way more debt.
Yeah. So I mean that's a very good point. I think that is a risk, and as someone I can say who's still paying student loans off myself as we speak, that's a risk. That's a risk you take on. Even though I'm still paying my student loans, I can definitely say it was worth it.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, high risk is high reward. But, it's, what kind of risks are people willing to take? You got to get out of your comfort zone otherwise it's not really taking a risk. But I feel like, in those areas where, they haven't really seen a lot of support from the government in the first place, they're not really going to want to get in bed with them and say, okay, I'm going to owe you guys a bunch of money now too.
Right. So, well, I guess that's kind of my question is, they feel that the government is ignoring them. But is that true, right? I mean, is it that the government is really ignoring them, or it's just, the urban areas have a greater need because they have more people, and the urban areas also produce like 2/3 of the U.S. economic productivity, right? Versus more rural areas producing only about 1/3. That's a big disparity. So
it is.
I'm not. I think that because we do, like the article says, rural areas need cities, but cities need rural areas too, right?
Absolutely.
We need people that work in rural communities to extract those resources, and to farm, to log, and also all the people that just love, like me, that love to visit these areas from the city. That if you want to get gas there, if you want to go to a store out there, if you want to get something, you're dependent on folks living out there. There's a big tourism industry, and I don't know. I think it's probably some resentment. It seems like most places you go that have a tourist industry, right? There is
Yeah,
also the attendant resentment of the tourist that comes with it. That
naturally.
right? That we need the tourist money desperately. Yes, yes, bring the tourists, bring the tourists. We hate these tourists.
Yeah.
Damn these tourists to hell.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
we need a
Also, why is it that I'm helping these people again?
yeah.
Yeah, no, I get you there. I mean, like, I think, like, so many of these other issues where there's like at least one side that is very passionate about it. I think it's gray. It's not a
Yeah.
black and white, like, oh, you know what, you're right, they're getting ignored, the cities are getting it all. And I think it's not, and I also don't think it's, oh, you're a bunch of crybabies, shut up and take what we give you because everybody gets the same. I think somewhere in there is that it's, I mean, the cities do get more because there are more people there. I mean, I think there's a good chunk of people that live in those metropolitan, urban and suburban areas that also feel like the government doesn't particularly care about what they have to say. Um, but with population density working the way density works, more people means, more of all of those sentiments, and they do happen to get the money, but you get out away from where there's people and there's less of the other resources coming for things like road improvements and the services, the high speed internet and better
Yeah.
better water quality, better sewage and all of those government services, law enforcement, medical, firefighting, all of that stuff.
Just less to go around. Yeah.
There's less to go around because there's less people, because so they get less funds allocated, and so you feel it. You feel like you're feeling it more because there are less of you around to get all that stuff spread around. And so I don't think they're wrong, but I also don't think that they're being ignored. I think that, there are budgets to balance, and there's a lot of people in this area and not as many people in this area. And it's just like, all right, well, then they get the big pile and you get the little pile. And,
Right. So,
I mean, I'm not going to say something like, if you don't like it, leave. But, I mean, there are some things that there are things that you can change, like by voting. And there are some things that you have to change simply by, learning a new skill. If an industry is dying, or if, if there, if a resource is drying up, then there are limited options than if it was just a simple matter of, we don't have good roads to get to this thing. It's just like, if the thing isn't there, then why build a road to nothing?
Right. Right. Well, you had mentioned also about the broadband issue, and that was another point that Brookings article made was that they strongly recommended exploring new federal and state initiatives to close these sort of regional disparities, like to enact programs that will improve or ensure broadband access for isolated rural areas. That is a major disadvantage, right?
Oh yeah.
I mean, now.
Oh, and you can get it out there, but I mean, you can get your internet through like satellite dish, like Dish Network and like DirecTV and stuff. But I mean, it costs more than Comcast, and Comcast isn't cheap. So, but then at the same time, I mean, like, you also have to be able to afford to have all that out there and then get somebody out to install it. I mean, like, it's still a big thing. So, I mean, yeah, the availability is far less adequate than it is if you live in the middle of town somewhere, within 10 miles of, the big city or the city,
Right. Plus, like, commuting, right? You have to have wheels out in the mountains, out in the wilderness. You've got to have some kind of a vehicle.
Oh yeah,
hopefully a 4x4, right?
Well, yeah, and I mean, like, not to mention, being in, the higher elevation during winter months. I mean, it snows there regularly in April.
Yeah.
So I mean, you got to be able to get around, and you got to be able to get around safely. Yeah.
Right.
And
so Whereas if you're in an urban area, you have access. I mean, you have a car. A lot of people have cars, but you also have access to a lot of public transportation that rural people don't have
Hmm.
access to. Whether it be buses or trains, even talking about San Francisco, you got trolleys. Um, so I think, or even just thinking of like the fact that most rural workers, they obviously most, if not all, pretty much have to drive to work. And since they live in a rural area, they have to drive a pretty long way, longer than a lot of people much longer than people in cities have to. So it recommended some type of, commuter subsidy.
Well,
Uh,
right, and they're also typically going to be driving a larger vehicle out of necessity,
right.
which uses more gas. And there's not gas stations all over the place, so you probably got to go out of your way to get to a gas station. I mean, like there's a lot of things that make it more difficult about living in those rural areas than it is to live in a more densely populated and like metropolitan area.
Right.
And so those kind of things also I think should be taken into consideration when they're talking about like what kind of resources from the state and federal level are allocated to those areas. They're not producing as much, but at the same time, I mean, like they could produce more if they had a freaking leg up every once in a while. And I
Yeah.
mean, like everybody'd be a little I mean, like what kind of price do you put on the happiness of your population in general? I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah, I think. Well, this article I think makes a good point, like a good argument for whereas the state of Jefferson folks would the ones that actually want to secede from Oregon and California, their solution is just to form their own rural state uh, with, I mean, mostly just small towns. I mean, there wouldn't be. It would be a pretty. It would not be an economically vibrant state. It would
no, it would be, yeah, it would be, yeah, I mean, like what
industry
would the
would be what? Tourism and logging would be the main industries, and mining, I guess. Um, of course, agriculture as well. Um,
Yeah,
but
yeah, I mean, but yeah, it would be. I mean, it would be agricultural, um, and I mean, there's not a lot of industry in those areas as far as like, I mean, factories and things like that. Um, I mean, like there isn't a major airport in the area.
right, but
Um,
their sort of solution is to just kind of they just want to leave, and
well,
they'll
right, just
fix it on their own. Which you can we can understand that it's part of it. You can see that with the name, right? The state of Jefferson, named after Thomas Jefferson, right?
mhm.
Wanting to be independent, self-reliant, uh, suspect of government interference, government involvement with your life, um, wanting to sort of go it on their own. But it seems that there's a much better way, and not just for Jefferson, but in general, to kind of bridge this rural-urban divide that calls for this kind of rethinking of our economic infrastructure with how
Mhm.
we've structured our economy so that rural areas, rural adjacent and isolated rural are not left hanging, right? And
Mhm.
especially isolated rural areas are given better opportunities, that we extend those linkages, almost like a supply chain, extending the supply chain, you know, better integrated further out, right? By, you know, better designing, uh, industries for cities, and better planning that takes into account, focuses less on the big, home run hitters of San Francisco, New York, Chicago, LA, right? The big focuses less on the big cities, or even like, right, the coastal cities, right? Portland, Seattle. These are big cities, big economic drivers, lots of people, but then makes that makes it more of a priority that that there be these more of these micropolitan areas, like small, very small, uh, city areas, that have more economic opportunity, more educational opportunity, better services. So even if you are still in rural, BFE or whatever, that that it's a 30-minute drive to the doctor instead of a 2-hour, right?
Mm-hmm.
That it's not going to solve all your rural issues, right? There's just fundamental issues with living out in the nature, right?
Mm-hmm.
In harsh, right? If you're living in the mountains, you're going to deal with some rough stuff. That's just part of being in the mountains, right? That's just part of being in nature. Is you're going to deal with some stuff, but that and that it's unreasonable for rural people to expect them to get beyond a certain portion, right? That they need to understand. Yeah, you've got thousands of people here. We have millions. We're going to have to, we have to allocate more to the cities, but we can better plan. We can take you into consideration better. We can reorganize the way we structure our universities and community colleges, and better, create better like vocational programs. I think that was one of the biggest screw ups that we've done from an educational standpoint, which probably we should talk about in past decades.
At great length.
Yeah. Was this push to put everybody in college, right? When, it's like we need a lot of people that don't go to college. We need people that, to fix your toilet, to build your house, to fix your car. These are not college jobs, right? And you don't need to go to college for them. You do need training, right? You need serious, mechanical training, but you don't need a 4-year degree for it. Maybe it's a vocational program, however long, 1 year, 2 year, however long, that'll get you working and making a good salary.
A lot of the trades will get you. They'll get you out working in like 2 years. I mean, like, and there are classes involved, especially with when you get into stuff like being an electrician or like being a plumber, being a mechanic and stuff. I mean, like you still have to, learn some fairly academic stuff, but I mean, you're right. It's not, I mean, it's not a bachelor's degree worth of like time or financial commitment, but it's
focused on the job. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's more about the work than the philosophy of the work. I think there's, that is something I think the more that can be part of the discussion versus it seems like in recent years, there's been this big rural urban divide. And so I think that covers our discussion for the state of Jefferson this evening. Thank you everybody for joining us. Thank you, Jordan, for joining us again and giving us your very detailed and specific personal insights into that area. Our next topic for our next show will be about housing first. What it is, it's a housing policy designed for housing homeless people that are homeless, that have all types of different types of disabilities and issues. That make it, whether it's drug addiction or mental illness, that make it difficult for them in a lot of other environments to stay housed. But has been some success in the use of housing first policy, where you provide housing to them with very few requirements, very basic housing, but a few very few requirements. You don't have to get off drugs. You don't have to have a job. Here's your small place with a bed and a bathroom, and here's the keys. That has had some success. We're going to talk about that as a potential solution to the homeless issue. So we look forward to discussing that with you next time. Until then, take care of yourselves, and we'll talk to you soon.